Hey everyone, welcome back to a brand new explainer. I am so pumped you're here today because we're tackling a topic that is just deeply misunderstood, yet incredibly common. Today, we're exploring exactly what happens if you can't feel emotions. And right off the bat, I want to reframe how we think about this. If you've ever felt completely emotionally numb, you've probably thought something was fundamentally broken inside of you. But today, we're going to look at the science that proves emotional numbness is actually a brilliant biological survival mechanism. Okay, let's dive right into this. There's this quote from Aspire Counseling that really just hits the nail on the head. It reads, "Numbness is a dorsal vagal response, the biological equivalent of playing dead." If you have ever felt completely disconnected from the world, just going through the motions in a state that feels entirely gray, I want you to hear this loud and clear. Your experience is incredibly valid. You aren't lazy, you aren't just apathetic. Your nervous system is quite literally executing a deeply ingrained survival strategy. So here is our roadmap for this explainer. We'll start with life without emotions, move into how polyvagal theory works, then the numbness response mechanism. After that, we'll cover 3 ways to break out of numbness and wrap up with a therapist's experience in treating trauma. All right, starting off with part 1, life without emotions. Emotional numbness paints a really vivid picture. It's that feeling of watching your own life happen from behind a thick pane of glass. But here is the most painful part for trauma survivors. It's the immense guilt. I mean, imagine getting a massive promotion at work or watching your kids play on a beautiful vacation, and instead of feeling joy, you just feel this empty void. So many survivors wonder, what is wrong with me? Why can't I just be happy? This inability to access happiness during objectively good moments leads to a really heavy burden of guilt, and that just compounds the pain of the numbness itself. Moving right along into section 2, how polyvagal theory works. To really understand why this disconnect happens, we have to stop looking at character or willpower and actually start looking at biology. I am absolutely fascinated by this because polyvagal theory, which was developed by Dr. Stephen Porges, it completely revolutionizes our understanding of trauma. For years, we thought the nervous system only had 2 settings, right? You're either relaxed or you're in fight or flight. But this framework moves us way beyond that simple binary model. It explains that our autonomic nervous system actually operates through 3 evolutionary neural platforms, and they are continuously scanning our environment for cues of safety and danger, a process known as neuroception. Now, what's really interesting here is how our nervous system shifts between 3 distinct states depending on our environment. At the top, we have the ventral vagal state, which is where we feel safe, connected, and socially engaged. Then, if we perceive a threat, we drop into the sympathetic state. That's your classic fight-or-flight mobilization, fueled by adrenaline. But what happens if the threat is just too big and we feel completely trapped? Well, that's when we drop into the 3rd state, the dorsal vagal state. And this one is characterized by total shutdown and immobilization. Which brings us to section 3, the numbness response mechanism. To really grasp how this works, think about a circuit breaker. Picture the electrical panel in your home. When the electrical load becomes way too intense, what happens? The breaker trips, right? It shuts everything down to prevent a fire or permanent structural damage. Well, your nervous system works the exact same way. When the stress or trauma load becomes completely overwhelming, the dorsal vagal system basically trips the breaker. It shuts down your emotional responses to protect you from structural psychological damage. So this isn't dysfunction or exhaustion, it is actually a brilliant biological adaptation. And this shutdown phase is distinctly different from typical anxiety. In the sympathetic fight-or-flight state, you've got a high heart rate, surging adrenaline, and hypervigilance. But in a dorsal vagal shutdown, your body's priorities completely shift. Your metabolism actually drops. Your heart rate slows. Pain signals are reduced. The body conserves energy and literally forces dissociation and emotional numbness. It is an entirely different biological profile. Dr. Peter Levine, who is a pioneer in somatic therapy, brilliantly illustrates this using an animal model. Think about an impala or a gazelle that has just been caught in the jaws of a lion. When physical escape is absolutely impossible, the animal's nervous system takes over, and it goes completely limp. It essentially plays dead physically and emotionally, effectively numbing the pain of the attack, and sometimes creating a split-second window of opportunity to escape if the predator loses interest. We humans do the exact same thing when we feel trapped by overwhelming trauma. We play dead, internally. Let's move on and see how this builds in section 4, 3 ways to break out of numbness. The great news is you absolutely do not have to stay stuck in this freeze response. Here are 3 overarching strategies for gently signaling safety back to your nervous system. We have grounding and mindfulness, sensory engagement and movement, and professional therapy. Let's look at the mechanics of how those first 2 actually work. Because your body is kind of stuck in this disconnected, floating state, you have to use physical sensations to bring it back online. Simple tactile exercises are totally key here. The 5-4-3-2-1 method is fantastic, naming 5 things you see, 4 you touch, and so on. Or even just holding a really cold ice pack. These acts firmly anchor your brain back to the present moment, gently reminding your nervous system that you're here and you're safe without flooding it with overwhelming demands. Next up, we have sensory engagement and movement. Now remember, the dorsal vagal state is a state of deep hypoarousal and immobilization. So gentle physical activity like stretching or taking a short walk actually releases endorphins and gets your circulation going. Taking a warm shower or smelling some pleasant scents acts as a small, totally non-threatening sensory input. And these gentle inputs slowly and safely awaken the dorsal vagal nerve, kind of coaxing it out of that deep protective freeze. And finally, Section 5, a therapist's experience in treating trauma. Shifting into the clinical perspective, I want to ask this critical question directly to you, because honestly, it is the #1 fear that trauma survivors have. What if I've been numb for years? If you've been disconnected for a decade, it is incredibly common to believe that your nervous system is just permanently broken and that you are never going to feel joy again. But here is the punchy, deeply hopeful answer based directly on clinical evidence. Your nervous system can always learn to come out of shutdown mode. Healing is absolutely possible, for sure, even after a decade of feeling nothing. The brain possesses neuroplasticity, which means it can be retaught that connection is safe, effectively ending that chronic dorsal vagal response loop. And here is the hard data to back that up. To put this into perspective, think about this number, 14.09. That comes from clinical measures tracked by Aspire Counseling. Clients entering their clinic with severe PTSD scored an average of 30.8 on their trauma assessment. But after just 20 weeks of targeted trauma therapy, those scores plummeted to a super healthy 14.09. That is a massive, clinically meaningful improvement. It literally means people who hadn't cried or felt love in years are finally able to connect with their families again. So how exactly do they achieve this? Well, it's through very specific, evidence-based therapies. Cognitive processing therapy, or CPT, helps challenge stuck points. You know, those thoughts like, if I actually let myself feel, I'll completely fall apart. Resolving those thoughts is absolutely crucial for the nervous system to realize the threat is gone. There's also EMDR for reprocessing traumatic memories in the brain, and somatic experiencing to physically release the tension trapped in the body. Together, these tools literally prove to your nervous system that it is finally safe to turn the power back on. All right, we've covered a whole lot of ground today, but I really want to leave you with this powerful paradigm shift. A trauma-informed approach completely changes the narrative. It stops asking the shameful question, what is wrong with you? And instead asks with genuine, deep compassion, what happened to you? Your emotional numbness is not a failure. It is a profound testament to your body's incredible will to survive the unthinkable. So here is my final thought for you to take away from this explainer. If your nervous system was smart enough to shut down to save you when you were in absolute danger, just imagine what it's capable of doing when you finally teach it that you're safe. Thank you so much for learning with me today.